It has been interesting in the 7 years that I've been on YouTube. I suppose you could call it the intellectual rise of censorship, of people. It kind of was frowned on when I joined YouTube. It was only certain theistic channels that really wanted to manipulate the conversation that got involved in these kind of things, and everybody else sort of regard themselves as sort of intellectually superior. It was seen as the intellectually superior thing to not manipulate a conversation and to not try and deny people a right to respond or make it more difficult to respond. And it's interesting that we've seen a rise of a totally different train of thought, and also interesting to see that the rise of that different train of thought is almost runs in parallel with a certain socio-political outlook. And I don't see any reason why it would necessarily swims down the same track as that socio-political outlook, but it seems to nearly to a man or a woman fall lockstep within that perspective. That's not to say everybody who holds that perspective holds that view on regard to manipulating and controlling conversations, but nearly everybody who's interested in manipulating and controlling the conversations seems to fall into lockstep with that perspective. Certainly that's been my experience, and it's really interesting because regard of our online spaces, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Facebook or whether it's Twitter, it's become a much bigger thing. And it's also become a much bigger thing because it seems to have gone way beyond that. We're hearing a lot of things, a lot of articles recently on the no platforming of people at universities. I'm sure you've come across some of these things, even in debate formats, even in a situation where somebody gets to say something that might be controversial, but there is somebody else there that has been cherry-picked to be the perfect person to dismantle their argument. Even then it's been seen as unacceptable, that universities are safe spaces and we can't have somebody espousing this viewpoint because it's too dangerous. Fucking hell, that's saddened. I can't say how upsetting I find that. You know, you're like the perfect age when you go to university, sort of 18 through to your early 20s, where you know a bit about the world, but you're not set in your ways. I'm a fucking lost cause, right? I'm an old wanker. I'm in my 40s. I'm set in my ways. But when you're that age, you're still open enough to dangerous ideas and to challenging ideas. And to say we've got to lock ideas down at that point in time, a university has to be a safe space. Of course, physically a university should be a safe space. There should be perhaps intellectually safe spaces on a university campus. But intellectually, universities should be very dangerous spaces. I think that's part of the pastoral care of a university. Sure, you've got to look after people's well-being, and when they need shielding from something, sometimes they're going to need to be shielded from things because they've gone through some personal trauma or whatever. But part of that pastoral care is also opening their minds up to things outside of their course, outside of their curriculum, that is going to challenge them, that may distress them, that take them out of their comfort zone. And the fact that we seem to be unwilling to do that, I just think that is one of the most upsetting things for me, intellectually speaking, that has happened over the last few years. And that then chimes back into the way we talk about our online spaces. Of course, we have this idea, people start talking about free speech, which is entirely erroneous, and unfortunately it has led to this sort of homophonic meme of freeze peach, which I say unfortunately because it must be one of the most gloriously unfunny expressions that has ever been fucking created. At least it gives you a chance to know, if somebody still finds it funny, just what a fucking boring bastard it is that you're talking to at that point in time, and because the whole expression is meaningless because it doesn't differentiate in any way. You can just fire that back at anybody who mentions free speech. They could be from fucking North Korea talking about the fact that if they complain about their leader's haircut, they're going to get shot through the face, and you can still say, ha ha ha, yes, freeze peach, you silly wanker, can't you? It just doesn't differentiate in any way, shape or form. But the real issue is to do with online spaces, with regard to how I perceive it, because that's what I come across all the time, and the way people can manage their online spaces. Of course, that isn't an issue of free speech, but what it is an issue, and the reason it's an issue of free speech, is because the free speech refers to the state and the state upholding our ability to say what we think, but that doesn't mean that private corporations cannot limit our activities. That doesn't impinge on private corporations in every shape or form, although there are some limitations to the way that the state allows private corporations to limit what we have to say as well. So it's a very complicated interplay, and of course no state grants absolutely free speech. There are still things, the old saying fire in a movie theatre, that there will still be for the benefit of society. We all agree upon that certain controls have to be put in place, but it isn't an issue of free speech. But where some people go wrong is they start to say that is because these are private spaces. YouTube is not a private space. Twitter is not a private space. Facebook is not a private space. They are privately owned sites. They are privately owned businesses, but they are still public spaces. In exactly the same way as my local hospital is a public space. It doesn't matter whether it's owned by the government. It doesn't matter whether it's owned by an NHS trust. Or it doesn't matter if a private trust was to buy out the NHS trust and run the hospital. The lobby in that hospital that anybody can walk in is still a public space. The question is whether it's a publicly owned public space or a privately owned public space, but it is still a public space. My YouTube channel and most people's YouTube channels are public spaces, albeit privately owned public spaces. And so we need to look at how they function as a public space and not regard them as private spaces. It really isn't like walking into somebody's living room. It's like walking into somebody's living room that has a sign above their front door saying anybody can walk in here and sit in my fucking living room, right? And you walk in there and there's all manner of people sat in that living room. That is what it is like. It is a public space. If you want to run your YouTube account, by the way, as a private space, you can set all your videos to private, or you can set them to unlisted and just give the links out to those people that you want to watch them. But if you set them, the clue is in the fucking question, ladies and gentlemen. If you set your YouTube videos to public, right, then they are public videos and anybody can view them. And so we need to look at the interactions in that light. Now, I don't deny anybody the right to manipulate their public spaces, to manipulate their online public spaces in any way they choose, as long as it is within the terms of the website that they're using. Of course I don't, right? And it isn't a free speech issue. But at the same token, you can't deny me the right to draw conclusions from the way that you manipulate your online space, and you cannot deny me the right to criticize you for the way that you have manipulated your online space. And that is getting down to brass tacks there, because let's not be under any doubt here, you really can manipulate your online space, because if I make a video and you make a video and ne'er the twain shall meet, right? I won't refer or link to your video. I won't allow you to comment on my video. Then sure, you've got a right to reply in as much as you can go on YouTube and make a video. But all the people that are watching my video are not the people that are watching your video. And if anybody watches your video, right, if you're fortunate enough to have a subscriber base and for people to watch your video, right, because it's a totally different group of people, in no way can you reach the audience that I've reached. So the audience that I've reached have a very skewed perspective about what you believe, because the only way in which they get to see what you believe is through the lens of what I've told them. So that's a very manipulative way of carrying on your online space. What can we do about that? Well, you know, short of hosting the responses that you receive on your own channel, which is perhaps a little bit more than we can expect of people, to my mind, the honest thing is to allow comments. Even if you don't normally allow dissenting comments, at least allow the comments from the people that you're criticizing in your video. At the very least, allow them to comment. And if they make a response, link to the response, make the response known, tweet about the response, make a Facebook post saying this person has made a response to me. If you watch my video, go and watch their video. That seems to be, for me, the ethical way in which you can conduct your business. By all means, this isn't a free speech issue. If you want to adopt different standards to that, do it. But me minded of one thing, people are going to take note of that, and people are going to judge you on the way that you handle your online space. And that isn't a free speech issue, but that's just a fucking fact of life, and that's something that you're going to have to live with. Well, that's pretty much all that I wanted to say on that. Thank you for listening. Bye for now. Just a little addendum to what's been discussed in the video, and I want to draw your attention to an article in the Washington Post which talks about the University of California and a list they've given on what they would constitute as microaggressions if members of their staff were to say these kinds of things. These are things which, if their members of staff were to say them, they regard them as leading to a hostile learning environment and potentially legally actionable. These are things which they would regard as perhaps sexist or racist, and things which you should steer clear of. And the reason I talk about that is because we talked about no platforming, and the idea, the defence that's sometimes made with regard to no platforming, or with making things inappropriate to talk about on a university campus. These are things which are incontrovertibly wrong, right? There's nothing to worry about, Jim, because these are all things which are incontrovertibly wrong. No decent, right-minded person would ever entertain these things in the first place, so what is the problem with putting them outside of the realm of what we can actually discuss? Well, on this list there's one of them that drew my attention. It's this one, that affirmative action is racist. So what it's suggesting here is that if a member of staff there was to say that affirmative action, if they was to hold the position, espouse the position that affirmative action is racist, that could be regarded, saying that could be regarded as a racist thing to say, as a microaggression, and they don't really want you saying that as a member of staff. They'd rather keep that zipped if that is your opinion. Most people would say that the United Kingdom is not some horrible, terrible, right-wing, totalitarian, racist place, certainly not in comparison with the United States, which is where, of course, the University of California is. And yet, if you go to the United Kingdom, affirmative action is racist is the position of UK legislation. Under UK discrimination legislation with regard to racial discrimination, affirmative action, as the term is used in the United States, would be illegal in the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom, which most people would say is a fair and reasonable minded place, has arrived at a totally different perspective with regard to affirmative action, which is regarded, no, that isn't acceptable. It is still discriminating on the grounds of people's race, on grounds of people's ethnicity, and we don't want to allow people to do that. So how can that be an incontrovertible thing? How can that be something which we should be pushing beyond the bounds of what we ought to be discussing? That's the worry that I have with regard to this no platforming and with regard to things like this. Okay, thanks for listening to my little addendum. Bye for now.